to address needs to address the dual need of expanding affordable energy in developing economies and building a global decarbonized energy system. Her work focuses primarily on the development-centric energy transition pathways, utility markets, and technology innovation for low-carbon energy development in Africa. Lily has lived on several continents, and as a result, for the purposes of this particular conversation, offers a unique perspective, having lived and worked on several continents across the world. She's written extensively on topics at the intersection of energy and development for Africa, and she also serves on the editorial board of the Climate Policy Journal. So if anybody has any articles, today is the right day to send them across in the chat, I guess. Lily holds a Bachelor of Biological Sciences from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana, a Master of Science in Environmental Management from the Aalborg University in Denmark, and a PhD in Energy and Environmental Policy from the University of Delaware. Welcome, Lily. Our next speaker is Charles Wanguhu. Charles is the director of NZ Ajayo Africa Initiative and is a dedicated advocate for Pan-Africanism, governance, and human rights, with an extensive background in law from the University of Westminster and the University of Bedfordshire. He brings a wealth of knowledge to his work at the intersection of business, human rights, and sustainable development. Charles's journey has been propelled by his dedication to upholding human rights, promoting green energy solutions for Africa, and encouraging good governance. His areas of expertise include energy governance, climate change policy, natural resource management, and he works to create a sustainable future for Africa through action, advocacy, and careful analysis. Welcome, Charles. Our third speaker. Hey, Charles. You want to say a quick word?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. Our next speaker is Dr. Vicky Gaffey Kondi Akara, a resident researcher in climate change science at the Ames Research and Innovation Center, and she conducts research and supports project implementation, as well as other climate-related projects, co-supervising master's and PhD students. She serves as a gender and inclusion officer, leading initiatives for gender equality, diversity, and inclusion at Ames in Rwanda. She specializes in weather climate services, energy demand modeling, efficiency management, and over 11 years of expertise in climate change and health, environmental management, renewable energy, energy efficiency, water and sanitation, as well as mathematical and climate modeling. She has numerous publications and reports to her name. She contributes significantly to global climate journals. And beyond her professional roles, Dr. Kondi is dedicated to volunteerism and is an African Climate Ambassador. It's an African Climate Ambassador 2024 and is on the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, and a board member for 2 terms from 2021 to 2023, 2024 to 2026, promoting STEM and youth leadership, particularly among young women, and Africa Union Volunteer 2021. Dr. Vicky Kondi, please, do you want to say a word with us real quick?
Also, hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and then looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest speaker with us today. Engineer Echo Apia Kofi is our special guest speaker for today. He is a climate change expert and manager of renewable energy technologies and energy consulting and telco services directorate, and has several years of experience in engaging utility business portfolios for renewable energy projects, supporting government of Ghana on grid studies, financial evaluation, business development, proposal development, as well as achieving universal energy access targets. He's a power system planning engineer and has been primarily responsible for developing energy and demand forecasts over long horizons, using both explanatory and exploratory methods of forecasting. He's undertaken several assignments, not limited to technical studies, including power flow studies, renewable energy integration impact studies, and distribution network development. He specializes in solar PV and medium and low voltage equipment, training and capacity building for engineers and operating teams. He has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Electronic Engineering from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana, And he's an electrical engineer by profession and is passionate about providing accessible energy to all through advanced research and improved technology with innovative, forward-looking, and goal-oriented approaches. Ekwa Kofi, please say hi to everyone in the audience. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. As I said before, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. All participant communication contributions and submissions will continue to be requested throughout the various speaker breaks, and we'll try to work in as much material as we can in an open-ended fashion so we can learn as much as we can. So first, I'd like to ask my first question to Charles, please, if I may. Charles, my first question is, where are we with the African energy transition? Are we up? Are we down? Are we going? Have we even started?
Thanks for that. It's an interesting question to ask because it's basically, you have to ask whether energy transition is a conversation that we should be having, or should we be talking about energy transition? Energy transformation, because when you look at energy transition, then it's a largely, either you're basically talking about Northern Africa and the transition that they need to make from gas, or Southern Africa and the bigger conversation around coal transition. And so therefore, for us at NZEJI, we try and focus on energy, what we're calling energy transformation, because again, you have to remember, approximately 600 million people still with no access to energy, and with only sort of, about over 200 in terms of installed grid capacity on the continent. So still very low compared to more industrialized nations. And the biggest challenge, I think, for Africa at the moment is the huge developmental needs that we have. And so therefore, even as we try and talk about transition, we have to look at how do we transform, and transformation has to include the access conversation and how we increase that access to make sure that more and more people have access to cleaner energy. Thanks.
You make an awesome point about accessing clean energy. Charles, recently I came across some pretty interesting data about the fact that the population growth rate across Africa is actually accelerating faster than the electricity growth rate. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask the same question to Dr. Vicky Condi. But Vicky, looking at what the developmental aspect of the energy transition has to be in terms of its considerations, where do you think we are with the African energy transition at this moment? Vicky, I'm sorry, you're speaking to a muted mic.
Oh, sorry for that. Sorry for that. I thought I was speaking already. So I think as Charles mentioned, in Africa, we still, in terms of the development side, I cannot say that we are up or down, but we still remaining poor. As he mentioned, the 3/4 of the population in Africa is still lacking the access to electricity. And as he also mentioned, about 1 billion of African still are not having access to the clean energy facilities. So, but though we can still mention that some countries like Ethiopia, as he mentioned, the northern and then the southern Africa, but I think some countries like Ethiopia and Ghana, Kenya, even Rwanda, where we are here, as trying at some point to make some kind of progress toward achieving this full access to electricity by considering also this transition to the renewable energy. So I think we still, I cannot say on track, we are not on track, but we are not started. I can say that. And then though as we have the resources that require, or that can also shift us, or to this transition pathway that we want to go. I think we can say that, okay, then Africa is on the way. I can personally say that we are on the way going through this transition pathway. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm happy to hear that we're on our way. I'm slightly saddened to think that some people are getting left behind to some degree. But I suppose Charles did allude to some of the competing developmental agendas that are going to be present across the continent, given the variety of the sorts of the people and the culture and each of the elements that affect the quality of life across the continent. With that, I'd like to ask the question to Dr. Lily Ordano. Lily, given your experience working across the continent on developmental issues related to energy and electricity access, and especially affordable electricity access, could you tell us a little bit about what you think about where we are with the energy transition and what you think we could be doing better, or areas that in particular that you'd like to see specific improvements?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jabesh, and thanks for having me on this panel today. I really want to start off by, I couldn't agree more with the statement that Charles made at the start of this session, talking about the fact that should we even be talking about an energy transition, or should we be thinking more about an energy transformation more fundamentally? And I'm more aligned with, with a view of transformation for the reasons that he outlined, not just in the power sector, actually, but I think it's even more troubling when we look in the cooking sector as well, where the region is way behind. And for me, the inability for us to actually wrap our arms around the totality of the challenge, that it's not even just the power sector, but it's cooking sector as well together. And the fact that that cooking piece of the puzzle gets, basically falls off the agenda continually is troubling, because then we end up with strategies which fail to address the totality of the energy transformation as we should be thinking about. And I think the second point I would make relates to, us thinking very regionally about what this means. The energy transition doesn't mean the same for Nigeria versus Kenya, for instance, because just the resource endowments that countries have, where they are economically, political, and social realities, all define how energy systems develop, all define the challenges, how people navigate the challenges with energy access, whether it's looking at on-grid, off-grid, or even looking at the cooking sector. And so we need to begin to move towards more region-centric conversations which reflect the realities of the African continent. We talk a lot about what happens in the United States, for instance, as a country. We talk about what happens in the United Kingdom. We talk about what happens in really identifiable areas with similar sets of challenges. And even within, some of these advanced economies, we break them down. You talk about conversations about what happens in the US Midwest versus the East Coast and all of that. We need to bring those reality checks into the conversation on the African continent as well, which is much bigger than a lot of these other places. So what does it mean for us to have conversations which are more region-centric and reflect the needs, both in terms of access, but also in terms of the energy transition? And then I also think one thing I would want to challenge us with as we move forward with this conversation is even to look beyond, most of the because the energy transition discussion was basically, it was birthed out of the climate movement, which is where all of this emerged. There's so much focus on emissions and all of that, which is great. But when we look at the developmental aspects of what we are trying to do, what is this adding or taking away from the African continent? And do we actually understand how the benefits weigh against the risks? What does that look like when we look across countries and across regions? So I feel that there's a lot of work to be done in defining what the problem is, right? I think we still haven't gotten things right. We're defining access, transformation, transition. Where do we sit and what works well for us? At what levels and scales should we be looking at this? And what does it mean for how we think about policy priorities and actual actions which emerge from those within the African continent? I feel there's still a lot of work done to be able to get those definitions right.
I think there's some wonderful points being made there. The cooking sector in my own work is one that I seldom hear given the sort of priority, given its almost universal touching of the quality of life of sort of people across the continent. And I think that with respect to scale, regional thinking certainly seems to make a lot of a difference. If we can get the sort of collaboration that everyone is having, right? And defining the problem correctly at the different levels and scales is an amazing point about how resources can be lended towards one another if we can really find common frameworks for countries to really start to collaborate and trying to implement things across the African continent. Now, speaking at the regional scale, I think Lily, I don't know if Lily knew that she was doing this, but she gave us an amazing segue to speaking to Echo. Echo is a climate energy specialist and has significant experience working across with regional programs on a variety of issues. Echo, my knock-on question to you, are there any specific areas or any other areas that you think of where the African energy transition could use some more work? Okay. Echo, if you are speaking, you're speaking into a muted microphone.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you. So thank you, Jabesh, and good afternoon, good evening. This is a very interesting discussion, and I think I really like the points Lily made, and Charles. We need to situate the definition of energy transition if we are to really identify the boundaries within which we track progress. Just for the purpose of those listening, I want to just come from the context on what we mean by energy transition and how we want to uniquely look at it from different country perspectives. So basically, the basic definition, which borders this is a shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, right? And if you are to only limit the context of energy transition to just this, then we really exclude a broader impact. So another aspect of it is that this shift must focus on three key things: reduction of emissions, climate mitigation, and then sustainable energy systems. So the focus for me is a sustainable energy systems, because you talk of sustainability, you are talking about the ability to meet present need without compromising the future, the needs of future generation. Where you look broadly outside of energy and you are looking at a human capital, the social impact, talking about clean cook stoves, talking about communities, talking about access to education, talking about regional integration, facilitation of regional trade, and all of that. So let me cite one key example. And I think all that I'm saying is to strengthen the fact that we are making some progress, right? And this example will give us that insight. So in Liberia, for instance, they have quite limited generation capacity, right? Where they have their hydro, and then when they are in the dry season, they support it with the thermal, which basically runs on HFO, very expensive and dirty fuel, right? And what they did was they worked collaboratively with the neighboring countries in a framework called the CLSG, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Senegal, and Gambia. And they set up a transmission infrastructure, which now provides them reliable and also efficient and affordable energy compared to using their dirty and expensive thermal whenever they have droughts for their Mount Coffee hydro plants. And in terms of readiness, a number of countries have also signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement. But the interesting thing is that, as I said, I'm always focused. I really like the point Lily made. There must be a link to social intervention, right? And if you look at the energy transition discussion and the support C4 all gave various countries, including Ghana, it looks beyond just the energy. It's looking at health, it's looking at agriculture, it's looking at education, it's looking at food security and all of that. So there are steps, the framework is being put in place, but there's still a long way off to go. Yeah, so this just bit I want to add to the discussion at this stage.
Paul, thank you so much for those points. I think you hit on so many things that cover so many quality of life metrics and impact areas for African people. I think we actually have an amazing question to transition from that in the chat. From Jean, you're going to have to forgive me if I don't pronounce your name right. I'll come to Rwanda so you can teach me how to get it right. It's Jean Intazinda from Rwanda. She's a climate finance expert, and she asked the following question. Will the energy transition objectively target the reduction in the cost of life for Africans or make it more expensive? That is very important for our fellows that are having trouble with adapting the most to energy policy change in many countries. Charles, that question is specifically directed at you.
I would have thought Lily would have handled it. She looked like she was ready to jump in on that question. Yeah, happy to speak on that. And I think this is something that we're already seeing, and I think that's a brilliant question because of a few factors. We are a very cost-sensitive continent or market, if we are to use private sector term. And so therefore, we are able, what you see is what we're calling this sort of organic transition, right? Because people are transiting because the cost, for example, of renewable just comes down, especially at the household level, which is very cost sensitive. You're seeing a lot of switching. Now, the challenge with that is that because of the sort of higher upfront costs, for example, for solar PV and batteries, you will find that it is creating some level of inequality, where the people who are able to afford the upfront costs of that are then able to access energy at lower costs, but are also able to have, sort of more stable, reliable energy, as opposed to more low-income households who are unable to switch. I'm sorry, there seems to be some.
No, you're good. You're good. Keep going.
Yeah. And so it creates a very sort of interesting inequality question there. So if you look at Nigeria, for example, you remove subsidies on diesel with a very unreliable grid. And so diesel has become more expensive. So the people who can switch off to, switch to solar. But what about the poor income households who are unable to switch or don't have those upfront costs immediately to be able to make that switch? And so I think in a roundabout question to her question, it's yes and no. In some instances, some households are going to be able to access cleaner, reliable energy at lower costs, and some are going to be stuck with sort of more dirty fuels in the longer term. And so that's a challenge of the transition as well.
Wow, that's so. Lily, I'd like to toss the same question to you since you are about to commit a coup d'etat against Charles.
Charles he's just picking on me.
Allegedly, without prejudice.
Right. But I think, I think this is a very, very important question, which is being asked about the cost of the energy transition. It's not an African question. I think that it is a global question. It's a very global question, and there are many who would be unwilling to take up initiatives for the energy transition if you can't guarantee that this is going to be cheap and it's not going to result in extra costs. So, and I feel that it is an even more valid point for the African continent, given where we stand. I always say that I think it is very, very unfair and can't be right that an average African pays way more for electricity than someone sitting in the US or sitting somewhere in Europe, where power is way cheaper. And so I think that the fundamental issue of ensure that, are you hearing me right? I think the fundamental issue around cost and being able to ensure that we are able to achieve the energy transition within the right costs, social cost is really, really important. And I think that for the African continent, what's even much more important and which we should be aware of is that I feel that when we look at the growth of the youth population, for instance, and increase in hardship, for instance, from which may arise from taking one particular route to the energy transition versus another, it could even result in social unrest. If there are no jobs, there's nothing really coming out of it, but just increase in prices. And so it's very, very important that we center these real issues at the heart of the conversation. I always say that it's climate and emissions, it's human economic development, and it is also looking at the sustainability of the energy system we have, not just the power system, but also of our cooking sector as well. And so we should be open to a wider range of options when we think about the energy transition, and be able to even take on this transitional role for some of the fuels which we don't even hear in conversations around the energy transition like gas. Doesn't mean that in some instances, countries would have to look at what the transitionary role of these fuels are. So I'm saying that we should walk back from very romantic ideas about what, this ideal future is, where everything is running on, and realize that issues of cost, social impact really affect how people make energy choices, not only in Africa, all over the globe. In Europe, we did see the EU redefining what clean energy means several times when it was hit with an energy crisis. Why? Because you can't be in a politically and socially stable place when people think that power or energy is too high. So we shouldn't be shy as Africans to elevate this issue of cost and what it means, because other countries who are even in better economic positions than we are asking these questions and are centralizing it in their policy decision making. And so I think that we should be able to judge the effectiveness of energy transition strategies, both on their emissions and climate impacts, but also looking at what the social and economic cost is to countries, as well as the impact on energy systems. I'll end it there.
Yeah, you were going to get us into a lot more trouble there, Lily, with the Europeans. I recently come across this graph. I'm sharing my screen. Can somebody let me know if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see
Okay.
it.
All right, awesome. I recently came across this graph, and I don't know, it left me feeling a little bit dissatisfied, because at least in my work, looking at a lot of the solutions that have been getting deployed in the countries across the continent where I work, it almost appears like the urbanized population, which at this point, based on this graph, probably seems like it's almost 50-50. Seems to be taking the lead in terms of the sort of strategies that are being deployed. Whereas a rural population that is probably either larger or at least equal, doesn't seem to be getting as much of a priority in terms of the strategies that are getting deployed for the energy transition. Now, I have a question around this that I was going to bring to Vicky, but Vicky, I'm going to save you for last because you're on this one because you're an educator. Ecole, given your experience working regionally, is there anything that you see that can be done within the way that we're treating policy and the way that we're treating initiatives that are intended to provide energy transition services to populations that can be done in order to kind of even the playing field between rural and urban populations within the African circumstance?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to agree with what Lily said, that the cost of energy transition is a global responsibility. Now, with respect to equity, which I believe that's why your question borders on, it's very important to understand that energy transition is a country-specific initiative. Right. What it means is that we can't take from a blanket perspective that, we need to transition all fossil fuels to renewable energy. There are some countries that don't even have adequate generation sources, even to start with, yet alone to talk of transition. So situating that in that context, then it becomes very important to think about how you will impact the socio-economic livelihood of the community and the human and the social environment in which you find yourself in. I mean, instead of thinking about large-scale utilities where we have limitations in distribution and transmission infrastructure, can we think of distributed generation where we electrify health facilities in rural communities? Can we think of solar water pumps? Can we think of solar at educational facilities? So the discussion has to vary. You need to assess what your issues are and then see how you align this framework of energy transition to it. So it's very important that government sets that tone through a policy framework. And that's something I strongly believe in, that we should dictate how we drive this agenda. And to start with, in your energy transition implementation plan must clearly include your impact on your socioeconomic livelihood in these rural communities. So that when you are talking about long-term gain, you know that it's something very sustainable and not just to meet big short expectation. So, I mean, this and maybe from my work, I think you want me to share some of the work we've done. Yes, Power Africa has largely been I've been involved in work on Power Africa, and one of the things we did was to focus largely on impacting the rural communities, where we supported the agribusinesses to acquire solar water pumps, and you are seeing how solar water pumps is helping them to scale up their business, increase revenue, increase the number of people that they employ. And I believe that there's the kind of discussion that we need to bring to the table so that we have equity in this energy transition approach.
Thank you very much for putting that in. Vicky, you're about to find out why I saved you for last. Looking at the bottom of that pyramid, everybody 30 and below, the population down there is absolutely massive. And Vicky, you're in the unique perspective in terms of the people that are on this panel, maybe outside of Lily, of being primarily as far as your professional life, an educator first and foremost. Vicky, what can we do to help those? I mean, basically Africa's largest population ever, to effectively be able to implement that which doesn't seem to be going nearly as well or as equitably?
So I think on my side, thank you very much, Javed, for this question. So particularly for African youth, as we all know that Africa is mostly have like a huge percentage of youth. I think maybe bringing those kind of opportunities, given the access to African youth to be able to how can I say that I think I missed a little bit the line, but I think with this kind of opportunities, African youths have the possibility to be included in terms of getting ideas from them. When consulting them to know typically their perspective in this kind of energy transition pathway, if I can say that, because I think most of them sometimes they seem like, okay, all the policies, all the activity that has been going on are not involving them. The previous speakers mentioned that at some point we have to better think about this inclusivity or inclusiveness about the energy transition, but also I think we cannot mention that the energy transition, it has to be I suppose maybe in terms of specific to each countries. When we look at the opportunity for youth to get more job or to also contribute to the development of their countries, we know that not having access to electricity cannot help them to get maybe to be more educated, or even to also have access to to get to contribute to the economic development, while maybe coming up with innovative project and so on. So I think shifting the way on enrolling all those youth in this pathway, maybe hearing mostly. If I can mention that from them, I think will also help to better understand what we need to do. I don't know if I really got to your question that you wanted me to respond.
No, Vicky, I think you did adequate justice to the question. I think that a multifaceted approach is certainly one that the continent needs. The gap that we're trying to bridge is far from just energy-centric. It just so happens that the world in which we currently live is no longer, 1820. The sort of energy, the role that energy access plays within African society has changed significantly over the years, and it affects every part of our lives, including the politics of the continent. And that's the last I'm going to say of the word politics for the rest of this session. First, I'd like to invite one of our audience members who has their hand up. Asara Bullen, would you like to make a submission, please? Okay, I guess, okay. So we do have a question from the chat, from Kadir. What core beliefs binding civil society advocacy coalitions on energy transition and net zero across Africa? Are these core beliefs ESG compliant to enable pressure on governments to be ESG compliant with policies that directly impact citizens and roadmaps for reducing or managing emissions? I'm not sure I have a particular view on that, but I'd like to throw that question to Charles, please. Hello, Asara.
Hear me?
Hey, how you doing? Please go ahead.
I'm fine. Yes. I was saying that I would like to contribute to the last gentleman who spoke before Vicky.
Sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I'm from South Sudan, and I would probably say that our energy is at a lower level, if there is such a thing. I don't know if there are energy experts that can correct me here, but if my contribution would come in, I would really like to speak on policy making, not as a country, but as a region. If we will not reach, let's say, Africa, maybe East Africa. For example, right now we are yelling a lot on carbon credits, who's giving a lot to the outside. But as someone who has attended COP28 last year, where energy was at the center of every speech that was made, we left Africa with one voice. We knew what we wanted as Africans. We knew that we did not want to sell out give out any carbon credits. We knew what we wanted for our climate. But the moment we reached there, every country was lobbying for itself. Every country wanted, if we can sell, let's say, to a European country, if we wanted to sell, let's say, to an American country, every country now from Africa had its own voice. But I really appreciate this kind of platform, because now we are here to speak. As an activist, am I truly honest enough to tell you guys that from South Sudan, this is what I want? And how does Kenya implement its policy? How does Kenya create its policies on energy to a point that it goes to grassroots, to a point that it is available for all, it is cheap for all, or not even cheap, it is affordable for all. So I wanted to second him, the last gentleman before Vicky, and I wanted to learn more and contribute that as we go towards COP29. What are we really looking for in COP29? What do we want to come back to Africa with? Is there someone can help me with, someone that understands South Sudan energy, and if they can actually contribute or advise South Sudan on how to run our energy, or advise us, tell us how to do it?
Thank you for your submission, Asara, and thank you for joining the session. I think So I too was at COP. I'm saddened that we didn't get to meet. But I do think that some of the concerns that you expressed are things that I've heard expressed by people that are resident in other African countries, that the level of collaboration to some degree seems to fall apart at the negotiating table. However, I do think that there's also, the African continent hasn't necessarily been negotiating for that long, I don't think, as an active participant in COP. And I think that it's going to take some time to get the voice right, but certainly I think I take the latter point that you made about basically sharing the learnings from countries that seem to be doing better in terms of implementing their climate-related policy, and how those things are going to get taken care of over time. I think that with that in mind, I'd like to ask the following question, starting with Charles again. Charles, what laudable preparations and steps have been made in all areas for the African energy transition, do you think? Ooh,
So-
I see a lot of hands up.
Are you asking, so what steps have African governments taken towards it, or
Yeah, so I'm asking what laudable activities or things do you think have been taken that from where you sit? What laudable actions have been taken that you think are worth emulating, that are really pushing forward the African energy transition?
Yeah. So I mean, there's many initiatives that are happening, and I think there's a lot of work going into that. So, for example, the accelerated partnerships for renewables is one thing. The Africa Green Industrialization Initiative is another initiative. There's what came out of Africa.
There'll be an awareness session we are planning for next month. And we're also having a branch visit.
Hello, Bobo. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry, Charles, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. So I was talking about the accelerated partnership for renewables in Africa, the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative. What came out of Africa Climate Summit last year in terms of pushing for, increased renewable on the continent, almost, 5 times more renewable on the continent. So again, these are initiatives, but I think we also just have to again be contextual in a lot of the countries of how that rollout would look like. Because you just can't pump in renewables. You also have to look at things like grid upgrades, looking at advanced grids, grid planning, and so there's sort of a balance. There's a lot happening in this space. I must say there's a lot in terms of commitment. Even for those of us who are also at COP, it's all the challenge is always shifting from commitment to actual implementation. So when you hear the promises, the commitments, the pledges, they're always positive. But then the challenge is how they actually implement it. And going back to the question, I think Adir was asking around ESG, and that's one of sort of what is seen as a hindrance in some instances towards implementation of sort of increased renewables on the continent. And then just lastly, also just in terms of touching on Asara's question just a bit, I mean, there is that collective challenge, but at the same time, you are seeing regionally, for example, some of the regional power pools trying to connect to each other, which bodes well in terms of increasing the capacity between countries where we're able to, take advantage of some economies of scale, but also, for example, take advantage of the time differences in terms of peak. And so there's a lot of things happening. I mean, the pace is still slow in some instances, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening, and I think we do have to at least give credit where it's due to some of the countries that are proving to be the first movers in this specific instance on energy, more specific.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Charles. I think Emanuela had a point that she wanted to make about COP and negotiations. Emanuela, please go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this gathering. So I'm Emanuela Doreen Kofi. I'm from Ghana, and I'm a climate negotiator. I'm a lawyer by profession and currently working with the Green Climate Fund here in South Korea. So I just wanted to clarify the issue of the negotiations. I used to think the same way, no doubt about it. Sometimes when you are not, let me put it in quotes, closer to the table, like your perspective or your views on certain issues are different. So this is what happens. I see a lot of collaboration between African countries. It may not look like that on the outside, but in the negotiation room, so I was negotiating for my country on Article 6, so the carbon market, which is largely based on, the energy sector and mitigation. So at COP, we have what you call the various, negotiating blocks, and an African group of negotiators is one of them. And so even before COP, there is like this meeting with the African group of negotiators to map out the strategies for negotiation. And then during COP, every single morning before negotiations began, we had some, I've forgotten how we used to call it, but it was the AGN meeting, usually at the one of the plenary rooms, trying to, come to that consensus of, okay, what is happening in the negotiation rooms? Who is saying what are the outcomes, or what do we want to see in those particular negotiations? And even after the general AGN meetings, each thematic area, that is the African group of negotiators following a particular thematic area, met separately to go through the document or the test and then come to that bridging consensus. Okay, this is where we stand on this point. It was only a few circumstances where some countries thought otherwise. So I think that a lot is being done. Yes, we are not there yet in terms of capacity. You can count the number of African negotiators at COP compared to, a whole team from the USA or from the UK or other, countries, because they have that kind of capacity. So I think sometimes we must give credit to them. And then each individual can become a negotiator. Sometimes we like pointing fingers. Me, for instance, I was not funded by my country to go and negotiate at COP. I was funded by another entity to go there. Once you have a badge, you can follow the negotiations and make in your inputs. Sometimes that is what I want to put across. And on the issue of energy transition, speak to adaptation than mitigation, because we are trying to deal with all of these issues. But money, how do we find money? Companies in Ghana or the rich people, in Africa are not willing to, invest their monies into it. And so we have to look for money elsewhere. And then people keep talking about, the European countries or Western countries dictating. But seriously, you don't have the money. Even the money you have in Africa, you can't even use it to support like the basic things that the continent is. So I think that we should be more open-minded and see where we can, get these monies from. There is carbon trading going on. So if you're an NGO, a social enterprise, and you're doing anything renewable, you can be looking at the areas or the countries or the organizations that are controlling the carbon market and see where your innovation would fit in. So I think we should be more open-minded and give credits for our negotiators, and also take up the responsibility of changing the status quo. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Hello, Vicky. I'm sorry, Vicky, do you want to say something about that, please?
I think, yes, I wanted to come back on a question that was asked by our colleague from Sudan.
Sure.
Was asking, what should be done by her country. So I think particularly, it's not something that has to be like typically a focus on Sudan. I think it's all African countries need to develop a clear and comprehensive energy transition plan. What I mean, this plan will help to outline a specific goal that we need strategies, and also define clear timeline, especially aligned with the country's development priorities and also the global energy transition objective. And I also think that it should also involve maybe some kind of extensive stakeholders consultation that will also help to support those various sectors of our society, our African society. So I think having a very clear and comprehensive energy transition plan knowing what we really want, as the other colleague has already mentioned, would help to really know which way should we negotiate on. What is the kind of negotiation that we need to do during those kind of COP. So to also come up regarding the question that you asked in terms of the preparedness that has been happening in Africa in this kind of energy transition. I wanted to mention that in July 2022, the African Union has a council adopted what they call the African Common Position on the Energy Transition, and the energy access and then the just transition. And this energy access and just transition is a comprehensive approach that will help the African in terms of short term or medium or long term to be able to develop the energy pathway to accelerate this kind of universal energy access, while also working basically on the transitioning parts. And then also there is this kind of this Southern Africa also country also have also launched in what they call the Just Energy Transition Pathway, a partnership, in 2021 to step up the replacement of their engine, and also the most costly coal fire power plant, and then mostly basing them on the renewable energy. So I think, and this also, I think with all those kind of initiative, though most of our colleagues mentioned that we're still on the way, but I think something has been going on already. And then I think we mostly, what I personally think is to look at what we are doing in the continent and what should we ameliorate, what should we bring into to make sure that whatever we're talking about would be implemented. And then it's not just like individual, because I think we can learn from all countries in Africa can learn from each other. And then as someone mentioned, if we go more in those kind of negotiation, though our countries has their own priorities, but if we go more globally, knowing what we want in Africa, I think we can mostly know how to better negotiate on during those COPs. So this was the contribution that I wanted to also add. Thank you, Javed.
All right, thank you for that, Vicky. Echo, I see that your hand is up. Do you wanna chip into the conversation real quick?
Yes, Jabez. So let me just add some quick points. I want to react to the comments from the lady from Sudan, South Sudan, and then also the ESG one. Listen, it's good to go in a united front, but the thing is that every country has peculiar issues. So the first thing is that have a good understanding of what your issues are and what resources are available to you. Right. I mean, South Sudan, you have oil, you have hydro, right? How do you take advantage of these resources to address the challenges that you have? And then the moment you began to now ask yourself this question, now always think of answering this question in a sustainability framework. How am I meeting the present needs such that I have I provide the ability for future generations to meet their needs? So the moment you have this sustainable framework, then you are thinking about, okay, so I'm going to use my oil and gas resource. Can I include carbon capture storage solution to mitigate the carbon? So that it's not everybody towing a line of put your oil and gas resource aside. I mean, can I probably just upscale my gas production, because gas is an energy transition resource where you probably will not want to use a lot of gas in the non-electric areas. So have a good understanding of what your challenges are as a country. Have an understanding of what your resources are. Clearly, Africa is contributing only 4% of the whole global emissions contribution. So that is not to say we are not interested, because even though we are contributing 4%, we suffer the impact or the effect of the climate change the most. So how do we sustainably utilize our current resources to solve our problems? And I think that once we have that discussion, even if we are going with a united front, everybody is going to come back with a win-win from that table. On the ESG framework, I think the ESG framework for me, I think is an excellent tool that countries must push, right? Because what basically it does is that it enables investors, right, or various stakeholders to evaluate an organization's risks and performance and how they are addressing sustainability. So for instance, if let's say you are a country, right, you have rail issues on road issues, you have water issues. So, okay, I mean, you probably want to solve these issues. Why don't we tackle a company or create the requirements such that you are supporting a company that has demonstrated that it's complying with the ESG? I mean, just from that, because ESG has about five phases. You have the human capital impact, social, you have the governance, you have environment, and you have innovation and social impact. So you realize that if a company, every company is mandated to take up this ESG framework, right, you can still drive your country's sustainability agenda through companies complying to ESG, right, and still have that overall impact in terms of CSG, in terms of community engagement, in terms of many things. So I really think it's one good direction companies need to go. I think Vic also made a very good point that even though we are on the way, we need to acknowledge the fact that something is being done. Now, outside Ghana, Ghana has a quite has established a carbon market. So what it means that, I mean, anybody that wants to invest in anything that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, you have that opportunity to trade it there, right? I mean, it has quite a comprehensive energy transition plan also. So, and it's not just Ghana. A number of countries have demonstrated their intention to also set up carbon registers, right? So with all of this working in harmony, we can see some good traction in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I think that's quite a bit of information to think about in terms of all of the coverage of the ways in which ESG could potentially impact. Jean, you're up next. Jean has a burning point to make, but I'm sure he's not emitting anything while he's doing the burning.
Thank you very much for allowing me. I would like to really say that I've been in this carbon market, sector for over 12 years now, and I attended a number of COP meetings. And currently, I am actually supporting, a number of countries that are piloting the standardized crediting framework. That is actually a tool to test the implementation of Article 6. This is the World Bank supported the program in actually testing the Article 6.2, but using the energy sector. Currently, talking from Ethiopia, where I am actually supporting the first mission, I would like to answer our sister from South Sudan. On that point, we need to understand that this energy transition should not cause pressure on African countries, because we always need to act in our local context. As we develop this model to test it, we also think beyond its actually expiration date, which is 2025. And the Article 6.4 will take over when countries are asked to develop their Article 6 national carbon market framework that will be allowing them to decide how much do they invest in mitigation projects, how much emissions are they going to reduce and help them to achieve their NDC targets, and how much they can trade to other countries through the bilateral cooperation. Now, we should think, do we really need to reduce our emissions at any cost, at an expense of our population cost of living. For the case of South Sudan, probably you need to allow continuing using fossil fuel for a number of years, I don't know, as you also plan sustainably on transiting to clean energy. But you should not put your country on a very high pressure, because at the end, it's all about for your fellow citizens that needs to really pay a certain price. And I would also want to talk about these African group negotiators. We need to really work on African agenda. We should not follow probably a concept brought by the big polluters on promoting energy transition at whose country's development cost. We've been really behind for a number of years. They emitted a lot. And now they should not stop us develop so that they bring us another quick agenda to follow. We need to develop our own agenda and follow it. We know whatever money they can, we can borrow from them will end up being paid at a higher cost, not only refunding, but also slowing down our development plan. Thank you very much. That was my intervention.
Thank you, Gene. You seem to want to set a fire to a lot more things than just the point that you wanted to make. Boyega, please do us a favor, come on board, and please do us a favor, just keep it as brief as you can. We have a couple of other items that we really wanted to get to with our panelists, so everyone can get a lot of value out of this. Boyega?
All right, thank you, Jabesh, for the time. Greetings, everyone, and glad for the opportunity. I'll be quick. So for me, I'll speak broadly on the subject of energy transition, and then the thing for me is, are we able to actually define what justice means within the space of energy transition? And then, you know, so this topic comes up every time because of my work within this space. I've also just shared some of the things we've done recently. And then we were looking deeply at within the context of industrialization and job creation, which is what we felt would actually help Africa, more importantly on the younger people. And so for younger people, are we able to define this? Does justice means the same thing for energy transition in Europe and in Africa? So, but if we look deeply into this context, you see that, yeah, they're really not the same, right? And so we should be able to actually put this context in perspective for everyone who intends to work within this space, and then let them know this is what Africa is standing for. And some of the things we are also discussing is to see, we shouldn't be looking at energy transition based on the development of Europe and now leaving it to the detriment of Africa. So we should be able to set the benchmark for Africa. What do we need to achieve with the just transition? I mean, some of the speakers are also alluded to that. We need to also come up with our own framework. I mean, countries have started developing their joint just transition framework. If we continue to run some of these things in silo, we may not have we may not be able to establish the potential that it will be able to attract for us than when we do it together. You know, so these are some of the points I really want to make. Of course, on the last one is the African Union Agenda 2063, that it's meant to actually rival the SDG. What does it say about energy transition? You know, so these are some of the key areas that we need to look at, and then come in handy with our development agenda to see whether it actually gives us hope for the future that we are anticipating for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boyega. Boyega did make a point earlier. I just wanted to note it for everybody. He has been sharing a couple of links to some interesting things from different countries in the chat. So if anyone is interested in reading that material, please do check it out. Dalalom, please make your submission. If you choose not to, I'll gladly make the submission for you. Okay. Delalon, while you try to figure out the mute, don't worry. As soon as you do, please send me a message in the chat, and I'll come right back to you. Now I have a couple of questions based on a lot of the submissions that have been made for our panelists to be able to get to. I think that there's a lot of questions that are being asked about effectively trying to figure out what would be some clear indicators of a successful energy transition. And to some degree, my sense of the conversation as we're having it is that those indicators are going to be rather multivariate in the way that they're treated. So let me start with Charles, and then I want to hear from Lily, and then I want to hear from Nicole, and then I want to hear from my senior professor, Vicky, on the subject of, for you, as you view the energy transition, what do you think would be some clear indicators that the African energy transition went well?
Yeah.
Charles?
Yeah. So Jabesh, I don't know whether you want us to also just touch on some of the questions, because I mean some of the issues that are raised are pretty critical as well. And I'll try and integrate that into your question on what success looks like, because I think your question is, what does success look like for an energy transition? And the basic answer to that is that success looks like, enhanced energy access that actually addresses Africa's developmental needs. I think that's, to me, that's just sort of what energy transformation would look like. But going back to some of the questions I think that Jean raised as well, there's some critical questions here around what sequencing looks like, even in that energy transformation. Yeah. Because we have to, we can't be blind to the fact that we can't follow the same developmental trajectory, and we have to accept that some of those are blocked pathways in terms for a lot of African countries, and I'll explain why. Firstly, financing, right? We have to be, to just be honest, and I think somebody else has already touched on this, that if we are looking, who are we looking to finance these projects? And so we can't make demands of some of the people that we are asking to finance these questions. And that's why I also get very sensitive around this ESG question, because I find ESG being used as an excuse to prevent some projects being funded that, that might deserve financing, especially on the African continent. So financing is critical, because whether you're talking about your fossil fuels or your RE, we are still dependent on financing from outside. We're still largely export oriented. And so now, if you're talking about trying to turn that tide, are you trying to talk about increasing domestic infrastructure that might not be, long term? Because the other thing that you're also talking about in energy is that you need to build energy systems that are resilient to the climate, to the climate crisis. And I think that's just sort of the reality we're seeing. We just come off a big drought. Now we are underwater, right? So while our hydro, was impacted by the droughts, now we have the flip side of the same problem, where even our grids, being affected by, too much water, everything's underwater. So again, sort of climate resilience, energy infrastructure is sort of critical. And for me, that looks like financing. So in a long roundabout way, we need to look at the sequencing. We need to get the financing to get the right energy in place that will be resilient to the climate crisis, or we'll end up in the same sort of back to zero, where we'll build all this infrastructure that will be destroyed, and we'll just sort of keep saying that we constantly need more and more and more. Yeah, I think that's my intervention.
Thank you, Charles. Lily, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Jabesh. So what do we see as success in Africa's energy transition? I see quite a number of things. So the first one I would say relates to just shifting the narrative. And I feel that there's a lot of work being done now in the space. We've heard a lot of it on this platform right now, that we need to have a narrative that better reflects the realities of the continent and also the regions and the countries within the continent. And so for me, if we are able to do that, that is going to be the first step towards success in defining what an energy transition looks like on the continent. But then relating to the issue of finance, I fully agree that, when somebody has given you food to eat, you don't have much of an option to decide what you want on the menu. Does that mean that we should sit and do nothing? I don't think so. I think that this is not a question which is only true of the energy space. It's true of development generally. We need to begin looking at more domestic sources of finance for this. We have a 1.8 trillion financing gap for sustainable development growth on the African continent. That money is not going to come from anywhere. And we shouldn't deceive ourselves that it is. And so I think that being able to get realistic about what exactly is available and the fact that we define what our strategies are and our forward-looking efforts to capture that reality is going to be critically important. I think if we are going to transform our energy systems and tackle the issues that matter to the continent, is going to be mostly through domestic finance. So how do we build more of that? How do we build more of that, and how do we advance efforts that do not cripple the abilities of economies to be able to meet both mitigation and adaptation goals? And I think we also need to think about how we localize value chains. I always give the example of China, that at the beginning of the climate conversations, the Chinese said, we have nothing to do with this. Now, fast forward a quarter of a century, they are leading in the production of solar panels, in wind components, and we now can actually sit here and talk about solar panels and the fact that it's cheap in Africa because of China. That is where those solar panels are coming from. How do we define an African story and take advantage of this market, thinking about how we localize these value chains on the continent and what do we need? We talk about critical minerals, and it's becoming another opportunity within the continent. Is it going to follow the same extractive patterns? Are we going to add value? Where do we see ourselves in the global race? We really need to move the conversation from, what someone is going to do to help and what someone is going to fund. No economy on this planet has developed substantially on the back of aid. And I think that we need to come to terms with that and begin to weave strategies that work for us and that are able to center how we develop and how we actually build those local value chains. Who are we training to work in these spaces? And do they have the knowledge to be able to develop some of these areas? Look at a place like Kenya, huge experience in the geothermal space. How can we advance Kenya as a leader in geothermal technology beyond wind and solar, but also looking at geothermal, where we already have leadership? What does it mean for countries in the East African Rift Valley that have these resources? So we need to indigenize the conversations more. We need to look within our local spaces. We need to learn, of course, but I think that going again to the example of China, it doesn't matter what we argue today at COP or at home or wherever it is, but how can we in the next 15 or 20 years say that, the DRC is now the leading producer of lithium, and within that country we have thousands and millions of African youth employed. I think that is where we should be looking at in terms of what success looks like with the energy transition. So Jabesh, I'll end my comments there. Thanks.
Thank you, Lily. Eventually, I'll be nominating you for Minister of Finance, so please stay on deck. Echo, you're up next.
Thank you, Jabesh. So what does success look like as far as the energy transition goal is concerned? I think any energy transition agenda that does not result in economic benefits or impacts has failed. And I think that we should not allow the energy transition goal to replace the industrialization objective of Africa. That is not to say that we should just stand aloof and not be interested in climate change. Climate change is real. I mean, the impacts are being felt. We have longer droughts, even the rainfall, shorter rainfall seasons, which are very high impact and resulting in floods and affecting the most vulnerable communities within our space. So the impact is very real, right? But we need to be able to marry this transition goal with the economic benefits. So, I mean, from the basic definition of energy transition, certainly you're looking at increased electrification access. So certainly as a country, you want to see how your electrification access has increased. You want to look at energy security. You want to reduce energy poverty. You want to have diversity in your energy mix. Ghana, I think perhaps 3 years ago, we had less than 1% renewable energy mix. Right now, we are about 2 point something. So these are how all the tractions that you want to see how the progress you make. But ultimately, there should be economic impact. Jobs, GDP, livelihood must increase. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Eko. Dr. Vicky Kondi, please help us out.
Okay, so I think to just add to what my fellow panelists mentioned, I think on my side, I would just focus on the energy efficiency and conservation. Well, I mean that I think at some point in terms of indicators, I also think that we can also see some kind of reduction in terms of energy consumption per capita, and then specifically like improving the energy efficiency pathway, and then also implement some kind of energy efficiency technology in specifically like buildings, industry, and transportation.
Vicky, your microphone got muted, so please turn it back on before you continue.
Oh yes, so sorry. So I was saying that we should also work on the implementation of energy efficiency technologies, and especially in buildings, industry, and in transportation, and also increase some kind of the adoption of energy efficiency appliance, and then lighting as well. And based on that, I just wanted to mention that the African Union Commission has recently proposed a project, which is the African Energy Efficiency Strategy and Action Plan, which aim to develop some kind of high-level energy efficiency targets in order to be able to measure for the building sector or the power, the industry, and all those transport, agriculture, and so on, in terms of continental and then regional or even national level, in order to be to work towards more like an economic growth, especially for the primary energy conservation. So I also wanted to add that in terms of an indicator, we also need to also see some kind of economic or social development impacts, such as maybe creating jobs and stimulating some kind of local economic through the development of those kind of renewable energies. For example, especially the hydrogen, that I think is an opportunity for us in Africa, especially for our youth in Africa. And also maybe increase more in the investment in terms of energy infrastructure, and also working more on this interconnection pathway for all the countries. Because if we have this system that are interconnected, it will help to be able to supply the high demand based on the population growth, and even based on the climate impact that we are almost seeing shifting. So those are the basically my contribution to what the others said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Delalo, do you wanna say a couple of words?
Yes, thank you, Jabesh. Sorry about earlier. So what I really want to say is that, like Eko mentioned earlier, the impact that we are going to feel in Africa towards 2100 is going to be very, very significant on GDP on the continent. In fact, in some estimates, it's about 64% GDP growth reduction in Africa due to the climate effect. And so I feel like as a continent, we are not exactly doing what we need to do in probably like mitigating the impact of climate change on our continent. Like, I mean, we are talking, it's well and good that we are talking about this energy transition, but the conversation around African energy equity is incomplete unless we bring in climate justice as a topic. We need to always include justice in the conversation. And we cannot consider climate finance as charity. Climate finance is not charity. Looking at 4% historic contribution of Africa to the climate effect, this means that if all of Africa were to fix its contribution to climate change, it would make no difference, absolutely no difference to the impact that we will feel in the next decades to come. So if we are a continent that really cares about the future of what development, of what agri will look like on the continent, on what the resilience of cities and all this will look like, we should start tying every development agenda on the continent to climate resilience and climate mitigation. Nobody should be able to walk into a continent and take anything away unless they have been able to make the continent more resilient or been able to mitigate some sort of action. So I feel like sometimes as Africans, we also just wait until the big conferences before we try to put our synergies together. But it's so significant what we are going through that we need to include the climate conversation in every aspect of our development agenda. This is the only way we can get ahead of it. Otherwise, I feel like we will just have these conversations for a long time and then we will live to regret them. I hope not, but we should be talking about these things.
Thank you, Dalalong, for that submission. It looks in the chat like Mercedes definitely agrees with you. So Dala, if you ever decide to run for political office, you have at least one vote in the chat. You might want to reach out to her. Next up, I think Nanama had her hand up, had something that she wanted to say. Nanama, please come aboard.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to agree with the esteemed speakers and more recently, the submission from Dalalong. I feel most countries in Africa, we really lack direction. I heard someone talked about the fact that we don't need to always copy from other countries. We have to understand our situations, customize our solutions per our situations, particularly our natural resources, and move forward with it. I am from Ghana, as many of the participants, and I think one of your speakers. We had early part of the year, we had an announcement of an introduction of a levy called environmental, what's the name? A levy like fighting towards mitigation.
Emissions levy.
Emissions levy. Thank you very much, Emanuela. So when I heard, I was like, why should a country like Ghana pay emissions levy when we have carbon credits? We really missing the direction. We have very beautiful policy. We are one of the first to sign up to these global treaties and policies, but we are not customizing the solutions we need to provide for our various situations in Africa. And of course, we are not united. So when we're talking about successes, we need that unity in Africa, move to negotiation fronts with one voice, united. That is when the continent or our voices become stronger before the international community. Another issue is it is important to collaborate, to learn from best practices from other regions. But then I repeat that we need to really customize our situation. We should have a direction, direct our education towards that direction that we are going. We have a lot of natural resources. We're just messing things up in our various countries in Africa, especially in Africa. We're just messing the natural resources and we are not managing things well, and in effect degrading the very environment that hold our existence. So a lot of the things are far from the issues of climate, even far from issues of energy. But again, talking about energy transition, it's also important to understand our specific situations, and our policies should guide us in dealing with this. I give one example. I was giving a presentation at European Parliament platform under an EU project. And then one person asked that the EU made there was a project that the EU actually presented clean cooking stoves and ovens in some countries in Africa. It strived for a couple of weeks and the interest died down completely. Then they asked like, why? Are we not in Africa? Are you not interested in the climate mitigation campaign and all of that? I came in to explain that we all want to save the planet. We all want to have efficiency in energy. However, we have a culture, and there are fundamental reasons people do what they do, even if we consider them uneducated or didn't have formal education. People have backgrounds to some actions, especially in the cultural settings. So when my grandmother goes to the farm to cut wood, to come and set fire for food, and you want to say, don't go to the farm to cut wood to use as firewood, but I'm bringing you this stove. Fantastic idea. But that grandmother, that is the way that grandmother exercises daily, on daily basis, or that frequency of exercise. Walking to farm and back is a whole exercise on its own. And we have some other cultural settings that we need to infuse, so the whole plan of energy transition, of course, we know is good. Those of us who have formal education, we have learned a lot and all of that. But they also know how to actually manage this or have these indigenous solutions well before we became educated. So we need to customize, understand our situations whilst we're providing the solutions that we need to provide. My submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nanama. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm sorry for Hussein and Asara, who still have their hand up. We have about 4 minutes until we're going to close this. So I'd like to ask one last question to our panelists. Please feel free to put what you were going to try to say in the chat so people can have access to it. My last question to try to close us out on this session today is going to be, I think Nanama made a lot of points about what lifestyle choices mean in terms of African culture and how that impacts things like health with her last example of the grandmother going to the farm relatively frequently as a form of exercise. And so the question that I'd like to ask is this, is and should the African energy transition be a people-led or interest-led activity? And what I mean by this is, should it be a people-led activity, meaning, a level of freedom and personal decision-making, or should it be an interest-led activity, meaning, the so-called common good or elements of other selection that allow for effectively the state or regions or other forms of institutions to kind of predetermine the way in which this is going to happen. So for this, I'm going to start off with Vicky, and then I'm going to ask a call to weigh in. And Charles, you're going to go next after that, and then Lily, you're gonna close us off, hopefully getting us all into a whole lot of trouble while you do. All right, so Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Jabet. I think on my side that the African energy transition should be mostly about people-led. I think, it must mostly prioritize the need and aspiration of our African citizen, and especially ensuring that it benefits them. When we talk about this clean energy access and the equity as well. And also, as Professor Nana mentioned previously, we should also maybe this will also allow to create a platform where their voices can be heard. And we should then it will also help to know basically what we really need to do in this kind of transition, because mostly on this kind of platform where we are talking and then sharing experience, we don't create a way for the people on the grassroots level or the indigenous people to also add their voices. So that's what I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay. Echo, same question to you, please. Should this be people-led or interest-led? Echo, your mic is muted.
Sorry, I was muted. So I will say 70% people-led, 30% interest-led. Interest because the impact of climate change is real, and we need to be concerned about it. And people-led because we want to see the long-term sustainable impact in the lives of people that we have this interest, or we hold this interest for. And the conversation should be very broad, not just at the government level or the corporate level, but we need to even involve the community, the local, rural folks, and then craft solutions that will have long-term impact. Thank you.
Echo, I really want to involve the baby too. So Charles, you're next up, please.
Yeah. So I mean, not trying to be controversial, but policy influences behavior. As much as we'd like, people-led, you can't. Like I mentioned in my presentation before, we are a very cost-sensitive continent. People, because of the low incomes, people will deviate towards what policy dictates. And I'll give you a good example, especially when it comes to clean cooking in Kenya, is that once charcoal was banned, and then at the same time, government reduced the cost on LPG, all of a sudden there was a huge uptake in LPG use. Once the tax on LPG was introduced, there was lower uptake of LPG, and then it moved to ethanol, because then there was an incentive to use ethanol cookers. So again, our behavior, you can't discount that people will shift towards policy. So the question, especially for civil society, is how do you influence how policy is made to ensure that it responds to people's needs? And that's my intervention. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Charles. Lily, you're batting cleanup. Do you think we should be people-led or interest-led?
Thank you, Jabesh. And I think that's a great question. I'm going to take the liberty as the last speaker to pick my own description for that. I think the African energy transition should be pragmatic. And by that, it's going to sit at the center of people-led versus interest-led, depending on what the local conditions dictate. And I say that because I think if we said everything was people-led, and I think one of the speakers said that we can have all countries saying, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that. And if it was fully interest-led, which I actually feel that we have a bit more of that than the people-led now, because there's a huge climate push, emissions push behind a lot of the efforts. And we are doing that to the detriment of locally led efforts, which are contextualized, which look to local context, look to economic development, and all the other things that matter for the African context. So I'll say that we need a strategy that is pragmatic. And what it means is that for whether it's a country or a region, we should always be looking at what works best for us. We cannot ignore the fact that climate change is happening, but what does it mean to be able to navigate climate change and address our energy transformation within the African continent in a way that helps us to progress developmentally, in a way that helps us to advance our energy access and development goals, and in a way that helps to advance the global energy transition and our contributions to it. And so we should come to these conversations. I agree with those who have said we should come to these conversations from an area of strength. But I think most importantly, speaking from a point of pragmatism, we shouldn't be stuck in the conversation and in the negotiations and the arguments. Let's look for what an opportunity is for the African continent. Let's double down on it and let's move with it, because we need to think about how we are creating jobs for the growing youth population, whether or not they are cops or they are whatever, and what happens with the negotiations. We have those pressing issues. And so we need to be pragmatic about how we build an opportunity space for ourselves, how we own the narrative, and how we have strategies which are both region and country centric and respond to the needs of Africans as we should. So I'll end there, Jabesh. I didn't put anyone in trouble there.
I think you left me in a little bit of trouble, also known as confusion, but that's not abnormal for me. Thank you so much, Lily, for closing us out in terms of that point. I don't know if I have any better answers off of this session than anything else that just happened. I have way too many notes. We have gender considerations to consider. We have benefits and risk to consider. We're talking about transformation. We're talking about regional thinking and people-centric thinking and reducing emissions and human capital that Eko was talking about in terms of social and education related outcomes and solution and policy sharing like Vicky was talking about. We have lifestyles and adaptation like Nanama let us hear. We have cultural considerations like Emanuela was talking about with respect to the negotiations and an approach to financing the energy transition. And then we closed out with out and out pragmatism from our resident Minister of Finance. And today's session certainly has left me with way too much to think about. Thank God I don't have to share my views. And I'd like to thank everyone that participated. Thank you all for being super active in the chat. Emanuela, I'll find you somewhere online or on a call somewhere. And Boyega going militant in the chat. Thank you all so much for participating. And significant thanks to the Jacob's Ladder team and the Africa Climate Ambassador Program for putting together this discussion. It's certainly been a pleasure for me to be able to hear from such a rich group of speakers as well as the participants. Thank you all for participating in the session. Back to Amanda and Lois for any closing remarks. Otherwise, I'm going to ask permission to get in a tiny bit of trouble. Amanda, Lois, I did see that we had a couple of hands still up and some additional things in the chat. There's a couple of views that I certainly want to hear. But if we do have to close the session, anyone that feels the need to drop off, please feel free to do so. But I'm certainly going to spend the next 15 minutes trying to hear what Mohammed has to say.
Jabesh, absolutely in order. I think the only thing is kindly for everyone who has logged on, if you'd like to be involved in any future conversations that the Africa Climate Ambassadors Program will have, such as these, please fill out the form that Lois Odhiambo has posted in the chat box, and we will keep you informed for any subsequent discussions. For those of you who need to leave now, we understand, but we would love to continue the conversation and hear those voices out so that we don't lock anyone out. So Jabesh, please go ahead. Jabesh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had my microphone muted. So now it's officially party time, freestyle. Mohammed, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to talk. You know that I'm really sorry that I jumped in the late time or by ending of this fruitful and very beautiful conversation. I like it so much. And thank you for inviting me. I think that someone remember me. I don't know, but it really was a very good surprise for me because I'm away from the negotiation and from the AGN for a few years right now, as I worked with the RCC for a while, the Regional Collaboration Center of the UNFCCC, and then I'm working with the World Green Economy Organization for the meantime. So, but I would like to distinguish here among a few things because the topic is very heavy, okay, and freely to talk out of the hat of the negotiator or something like that, but just an African citizen, I would like to just distinguish between a few things. The issue of the negotiation, because many of us have been involved over there, and we know that the African continent itself, the AGN, is divided into subgroups. Okay, we all know that the least developing countries, the SEDS, some of the African countries are like this. So I think sometimes the consensus among the African group is very hard to achieve in terms of negotiation or like one solid political opinion. So this is to put it aside. In terms of the just the transition itself, I believe this term cannot be applied to the whole continent of Africa because we have a huge gap between like among some countries. Some countries are they have sufficient energy, they need to transit. Others, like as we all know, that there is a huge gap and a lack of access to energy, whatever type of energy. Okay, so I believe that if we are going to use the term just a transition or energy transition, I believe this is for the a provision of African futuristic development plan. Okay, to avoid working with business as usual scenario, to go to another scenario, to the sustainable scenario, or to the green scenario, or to the blue scenario. Any alternative scenarios alternate from the business as usual, like fossil fuel or those. So I believe the term itself, we need to look at it. And I think if we're going to apply this and to work on it directly, I think we need to start to classify African continent, the whole continent, into region according to the need. Okay, because I think some places in the African continent is really in a need for energy access and need for energy development, whatever in the grid or in the energy resources itself. On the other hand, I believe also the development plans for Africa need to match with a couple of initiatives that has been targeted by the African Union and supported by the AGN as well. So if we can just provide some suggestions and work on some, this is just like ideas crossing my mind from here and there and there, to work on something like we have like the 200 and plus, maybe 300 experts, all of us around here right now. So we can put our effort over there to write something that can be used actually as an outline or a framework, okay, as a plan to the African continent, even the source, the resources, the financial resources needed. I believe that we can just like try to use our expertise, like people talking about Article 6, the mechanism, whatever, Article 6.4 or Article 6.8 or 0.2. Okay, I believe that we can work on something to reform the carbon market or the carbon credit into some source of finance for the new. Sorry, you want to say something? You were pointing.
No, I was just listening. Sorry, that was just my finger coming up from my hand.
I'm sorry for that. I'm really sorry that I talked so long, but you know there is a lot of ideas over there in my mind, and I didn't take notes, but I was just enjoying listening, and there is a lot of ideas and a lot of things. I believe that the 90 minutes, it is not enough. Okay, and really,
well, I'm going to invite you, Mohammed, to come give a lecture at some point in the near future because I want to hear the rest of this. But look, super. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm reasonably sure, having seen what other folks were writing in the chat, that there are probably more people here that share your views than don't. And so I'm going to leave that homework for Lois and Manda and the Jacob's Ladder team to do. I don't feel sufficiently competent to be able to do so. We're going to enter now the battle rap format. Okay, anybody, I call your name, you have 1 minute to hit us with everything you've got, and then I'm going to cut you off at the end of it. Deal? All right. I'm going to be an autocratic leader for one day. I always wanted to be. Hussein Marous, you have 1 minute. Please hit us with everything you've got.
All right, thank you so much. I heard all the intervention, and I'm really impressed, guys. So I'm gonna be direct concerning the carbon or the energy transition in Africa. I think this problem we talked about many times. Until now, there is no solution. So we are like putting our future in the fire, and also the future of our children in fire. So without taking action, I think we will talk 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, and the problem will continue without solution. So what we need now, guys, we need action. We need to raise our hand. We need to raise our voice to those political to the politics, the political people. So I think the energy problem is political and strategic problem. So if we really need change in Africa, we have to make action. We have to raise our voices so far, and we have to have a strong commitment. Like right now, I saw many people here, and I'm so proud. And like this, we will have also to raise our voices to let them know that we are the youth, and we will not be able with what you are doing right now. So I think we have, guys, to be pragmatic, like someone told right now. We have to be pragmatic. We have to be more stronger when we talk, to let them know that we will not be like those who were before. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hussein. Muhala Christian, you have your 1 minute, and I'll count you down as the 1 minute comes to an end, so you know when to finish up. But please make your submission.
Thank you very much, Jebs. I'm Murula Christian. I represent the Youth Hub Foundation, a refugee youth-led organization in Uganda, Kampala. And I'm looking at this same topic have caused a number of ravages, whereby it's the reason of movement of a number of people and a number of population from country to other countries. Now, my question will be, or my submission is to know, how are these refugees and displaced people involved in this? Because if it hits in a president's house, it hits also in the refugee house and the lower community members. How are we doing to involve these and make them participate in the solution and ways of resolving this as part of other population? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muhala Christian. Perfect. Okay. I noticed that Emanuela had her hand up. Dalalom, I'm coming to you after I check whether Emanuela still wanted to say something real quick.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you for this. I'm gonna sleep, so my 1 minute, I'm going to be conscious of that. All that I want to say is that there is so much in the system when it comes to this whole renewable energy, climate change. We as Africans need to sit down and then do your research, probe the system. There's so many things that are ongoing. I see so many CSOs, we are looking for money, we are not finding, but you've not even built your organizations to be able to meet the requirements. Obviously, nobody will give you money if you don't meet the requirements. And I feel like sometimes we like pointing fingers too much, like we have to take charge ourselves. Government is not doing anything, but in your own little space, what are you doing? How are you building your capacity? We are talking about energy transition, but most young people are still in school studying courses that honestly, in the next 10 years, it will not be of any relevance. So how are we sort of like turning our energies and then our strategies towards meeting this whole like global new trend? So that is what I just want to say. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. Good night. Sleep well. Next up, Delalo.
Yes, Javesh, you can start counting down now. So,
all right. You got it.
So the point the point I want to make is that these are not trivial issues for Africa.
Facts.
Climate change is actually a literal matter of life and death. People will die if we do nothing about it.
Got it.
So what we need to do is to redirect the continent's policy focus, because if we all knew for a fact that lives were at risk, I think our responses would be more critical. And so we need to encourage people to go into climate jobs. We need to retool ourselves, like we need to reskill, get as many people as possible involved. And we need our negotiators to speak the voices that will defend us or will speak for us. We need to have a more unified front at negotiation tables. And we need the big boys on the continent. And I'm speaking to Nigeria, I'm speaking to South Africa, speaking to Egypt, I'm speaking to Kenya. We need some of these countries to step up and spread their expertise around the regions that they are in, so that we can all get where we want to go.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much. Josie, I will come to you in 1 second. I noticed that Asara had her hand up, and I just want to check with her real quick if she has something she wanted to say. And then after Josie, we're going to come to Frederick Omondi. Asara, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much. I'm Josue from DR Congo, working as Executive Director of Congo Basin Conservation Society. I think that the issue we have about energy transition, this needs a joint effort from African ally. The specific case we have in DRC needs to join more effort, because without your collaboration and your support, we could not reach this target together, because we have more challenges with what we have, mining, mineral, strategic mineral, and whatever, with the problem of human rights and land grabbing, land degradation. And nowadays we are more affected with drought, for inundation, with more disaster. So we think that the mining we have had in DRC, mining we have had in DRC, could be increased again about human rights. When, for example, oil exploitation will be again and whatever. So would like to know what kind of action could we take together in the within this framework directly, without talk. We need action, concrete action, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josue. Did I get your name right, Josue? I'm trying to. Josue. Okay, good. My apologies for butchering it earlier. Okay. Awesome. We're probably gonna give it another 8 minutes or so. At this point, I'm going to point and shoot. So if you're somebody that joined this call really early, you're in trouble. Because I'm gonna ask you to share your views real quick. So Melanie, come on, Melanie, unmute the microphone.
Well, I am just grateful to have been part of the conversation and listen to the very many insightful views that have been tabled today. And I can't wait to be part of the solution towards some of these problems.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Frederick?
Oh, good evening.
Hey, Frederick.
Hi. I'm Frederick from Kenya.
Okay.
It's actually almost 9, and I need to appreciate the program. It has been enlightening and quite informative. In Africa, we should always not pay so much for energy when we know we have a lot of resources that can provide energy. The program has really enlightened us on so many avenues. For example, in Kenya, we have water sources that can supply energy. We have wind, that can also supply energy, and yet you find the households are paying a lot of money for the energy that they use in their households and in other businesses. So I still urge to get more programs that are related to this, and I wish everyone a good time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Frederick. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for staying up so late. I think it would be completely unreasonable to ask anybody to stay on any longer. Plus, I want to go get dinner, so full confession. So thank you everyone for joining the session. John, I see you over there in the video. I'll come find you. I'll come find you. And Dela, thank you for your submissions. Melanie, thank you for joining us. Bubakan, Lois, everyone at Jacob's Ladder, you guys are awesome as always. And thank you everyone for joining this this session. We look forward to engaging with you all to continue the conversation, whether it's on LinkedIn or any other space where we may find each other. I truly believe that a lot of people that are committed to doing something that is beneficial for the people of this continent is certainly useful, and we'll find each other professionally and otherwise, and use that to try to make some change in our communities. Everyone have the most amazing week, and look forward to seeing you all wherever I see y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you for the session.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.